This morning, as I continue my series on parables, words that Jesus spoke, we remind ourselves that parables, as we've said before, convey one message. They are not allegories. And yet, as we read this parable, the one known as the wicked husbandmen or wicked tenants, we read very clearly an interpretation which is an allegory. It's been interpreted that every little bit of this story represents something, where every detail is made to represent the death of Jesus and God ultimately being the owner of the vineyard. And Matthew, as he writes this story, is very aware of the reference to God's vineyard in the prophet Isaiah. And the whole story has the Isaiah concept as its base. And Jesus, a reader and understander of the scriptures, would have known this. But Matthew, writing for the Jews, uses some of the exact words from Isaiah, again linking Jesus to those Jewish scriptures. Matthew's careful construction of the vineyard closely allies with that song of the vineyard. The hedge, the winepress, and the tower all come from Isaiah. And the reference is not to an earthly owner of the vineyard, but to God and Israel. Therefore, in Matthew, we have an allegory. This, again, is a later addition. We know that there was a school of writers towards the end of that first century, the Matthean school, who were gathering, like is the case with most of the writings in the New Testament and indeed the Old Testament, were gathering together all the bits and scraps of information that they could find, documents that had been written, and then interpreting them in the way that they wanted to interpret them to fulfill their particular message that they wanted to convey. But this is not an allegory. It is a one-message parable. And the message is this: the vineyard, or the gospel, therefore, will be given to others. The others being as they are related in the other parables: the poor, the disadvantaged, the rejected, the unholy, even horror of horror, Gentiles and women. We might want to interpret that now in a modern sense as we think about how that gospel and kingdom is being given now. We might want to say that we should include the homeless, we should include people who are in prison, those who don't come to church, those who are regarded as different to us, those who are not regarded as equal. There's a thought at the moment when some people are regarding the LGBTI community as not quite equal to those of us who call ourselves normal, whatever that means. So, let's just think then about this parable, shall we? This is Jesus, as he often does, and that's what the parables are all about, using a common situation which all his listeners would understand. They would know, they would identify with it. Palestine at the time was a very troubled land. and absentee landlords were numerous. It was by no means unusual for a man to let out his ground, and it always was a man because a woman couldn't own property, and then go and stay in some more comfortable, less conflicted country. That was happening regularly, and when that was done, rent would be paid for the vineyard that they'd left behind. It either might be a fixed sum of money or an agreed proportion of the crop or a definite amount of produce, irrespective of what the crop was. Palestine was in a very highly explosive state. There was unrest and there was labor troubles. And this very kind of thing could and often did happen. Tenants did refuse to pay the rent. Tenants did beat up the absentee landlord's representatives and did resort to violence to gain possessions of estates which were not rightfully theirs. It was a perfectly recognizable story. People would, yeah, I get that. I understand that. Now, imagine this story then being told in the cloistered, religious environment of a synagogue. And this rather different sort of scribe from Nazareth, sitting there in the scribe's chair and telling a story predominantly to the people who were in the synagogue there with him, the religious, the scribes and the Pharisees. Those who were pretty sure of their ownership of God. Those who did all the right religious observances. Those who ate the right food, who prayed the right words, who studied the right scriptures. Those who had God in a box, their box. And they were pretty self-satisfied with that. And here is this lowly nobody with no real religious credentials. He has the nerve to come into our synagogue and question our God certainties. You see, this whole parable is a real shot at the comfortable religious institution. That the kingdom of God is outside the synagogue, that the kingdom of God is outside religion, that like this vineyard, it's given over to others. So hold that thought for a moment. And then think of some other messages that this parable might have for us right now. Firstly, human privilege. Consider this vineyard. Everything possible has been done for it. It was hedged around so that no marauding animals could get in. The wine press, a great stone-lined pit in the earth, had been dug so that the grapes could be pressed and the juice extracted. A watchtower had been built so that sentinels could keep guard against robbers. Very privileged environment. We know what it's like now, don't we? We only have to walk around some of those leafy suburbs and we can see privilege big time. And we're part of it big time. Then consider our own situation. I know we all carry baggage, of course we do. There is stress, and there is grief, and there is pain in our lives. We know that. But let's just remind ourselves for a moment of those images from Myanmar. Satellite images showing us that more than 80 villages in the Rakhine state have been set ablaze. Thousands and thousands of families have lost their homes. And if they've just about managed to cling on to their lives, they're trudging through mud, hundreds of miles to try to seek safety and refuges in Bangladesh. They are traumatized and they are exhausted with nowhere to go and everything lost. And this ethnic cleansing, because that's what it is resulting in huge death toll and massive inhuman turmoil. How come? How can we continue to break across the world and even in our own land the World Human Rights Charter? We do it in our own land by keeping refugees in mandatory detention. How can we, when we consider those things, how can we possibly complain from our privileged, comfortable church, home, and community? Think of the wealth and the resources that this country has. Think of our educational and academic institutions. Think of our medical facilities. Think of our sporting and lifestyle opportunities. Think of our architecture, our arts, our music, our churches, our corporate wealth, our rule of democracy, our beaches, our mountains, our cities, our towns, our villages, our infrastructure, our history, our food, our entertainment, our pets, our relative safety, our holidays, our literature, our families and our friends. Think of all those. We're truly a privileged people. Our vineyard, yes, is full and fruitful and delicious. First thing, the privilege that we have. Second thing, the freedom that we have. The owner of this vineyard, after setting it up, has the ability to go away, to let it out, to get on with his life, to go and live a better life somewhere else, the freedom that it brings to the owner of this vineyard. And so are we. Our national anthem praises the fact that we are young and free. Our country is not really young, as the anthem suggests, but we are free. We have the ability to make choices. We live in a place where we can pretty well live our own lives. We can decide where we go, what we do, what we wear, what we eat. We can enjoy freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to vote, freedom of association, freedom to disagree, and the freedom to democratically change things if we wish. And, of course, we do have religious freedom. And I'm reminded of the many, many places where that freedom doesn't exist. It's not that long ago. We can remember it, when churches in South Africa were policed to ensure that black and white congregations did not mix. When I was talking only a couple of weeks ago to the Coptic Orthodox Bishop of Australia, Bishop Cyril, he was grieving the martyrdom now, of many Coptic Christians and clergy in the world who simply had not been allowed to meet and to worship in their traditional way. And more than that, here in St. Michael's, we have the freedom to think, to challenge traditional concepts. We are not bound to blindly accept what dogma and centuries of religious rules insist that we believe or do. We are a thinking people. I was speaking this week to a group of executives of one of the big corporates in this nation. I was speaking to them on marriage equality. They'd invited me to speak to their top executives. So just as an aside, let me say this. I've been incredibly impressed with the strong stand that many corporates have been making so far on marriage equality, and that number is increasing. These corporates include PwC, Qantas, Amazon, ANZ, Westpac, Bonds, Baker's Delight, Coopers, Foxtel, Goldman Sachs, GSK, Hester, JBR Hi-Fi, LJ Hooker, Mars, Mirvac, Myer, QBE, Red Rooster, Target, Virgin, Visa, Channel 10, Saatchi, Origin, Medibank, Levi's, Deloitte, Commonwealth Bank, the AFL and the NRL, and hundreds of others, all of which are boldly displaying in their corporate headquarters and in their publications the rainbow flags. But sadly, when I walk past the dismal headquarters of the Uniting Church here on Little Collins Street, I see nothing. It is lifeless, as its bureaucracy suggests. And yet the world moves, and again the church is left behind. The church arrives breathlessly to the battleground long after the conflict is concluded. I digress, I'm sorry. Back to my main point. This point of human freedom. The point that I was speaking at a corporate function this week was made very, very strongly, because I don't know how many people were there. These were their senior executives, about 50 or 60 people. And there was massive support for marriage equality from that group, pretty well from everybody there, bar one. And this woman stood up and she said, "I agree entirely with marriage equality, and the arguments are sound, and of course it should happen," she said. But she said she was a Catholic, and therefore she had to vote no, even though she didn't agree with it. What a shame. Not here. Not here. We have true religious freedom. We have the freedom to make our own mind up about stuff, about our own faith. We have no straitjackets. We have no chains of tradition and mythology. Our freedom here is dynamic and joyful and liberating. We celebrate that freedom. We celebrate the privilege that we have in our world and in our church, and the freedom that we have in those places. Wonderful. But at the same time, we have to look at this parable again, because it says something else to us, not just about privilege and freedom. It says something to us about stupidity. We see this landlord gives this beautiful tenancy to be cared for and developed to somebody else, and boy, did they get it wrong. They're more concerned about their immediate return rather than looking at long term. They say, let's grab this land, let's grab this vineyard, let's exploit and destroy, rather than to care and grow and improve. Echoes here of what we, so-called clever, intelligent, privileged, free tenants of this wonderful vineyard of ours, what we're doing to it. Unprecedented levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, widespread species extinction and deforestation, high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in the oceans are putting humanity beyond thresholds that scientists tell us are safe for the continuation of life on Earth. In 2009, a group of 28 world-class scientists from all over the globe came together to create their report, which was called the Planetary Boundaries Framework, which identified 9 processes that need to be monitored to maintain, listen to this, to maintain life on Earth. Yes, life on Earth. And the processes were ozone depletion, biodiversity loss, chemical pollution, climate change, ocean acidification, freshwater composition, land systems change, nitrogen and phosphorus flows, and atmospheric aerosol loading. Crossing those thresholds for any of those processes could generate abrupt and irreversible environmental changes. Of those 9, we've already surpassed 4 of them. Carbon dioxide levels are at historic highs, radically altering the Earth's atmosphere and oceans. Approximately 58,000 square miles of forest are felled each year. Species are going extinct at a rate 100 times faster than ever before in the history of the world. Humans are now causing the next great extinction. It was 500 million years ago when a catastrophic meteor killed off the dinosaurs and which wiped out 97% of all species. Now, scientists tell us, we are looking at the next wave of mass extinction. All caused not by a meteor billions of years or light years away, all caused by stupid humans. In the scientific journal Nature, I read that we are seriously looking at the potential extinction of 41% of amphibians, 26% of all mammals, and 13% of all birds. Right now, as I stand here this morning, we are looking at approximately 10,000 species a year are going extinct. And that's at the low side. Some scientists say 36,000 a year. And the worst case scenario in that report, compiled by top world scientists, say, this is staggering, 75% of life on Earth may become extinct by 2200. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature warns that more than 20,000 of the present 75,000 species they studied are at risk. I could go on. It's really, really crazy. And it's all because of human stupidity, of greed, of denial, of short-term gain over long-term loss, and lack of world cooperation. This is serious. And I appeal to you this morning to all seriously consider this and to do something about it. And you can start by talking to our own Sally Clark or Cheryl Power. There are some brochures available today, I believe. And I would want this particular environmental issue to stand alongside the social justice issue as a central platform for the life and ongoing work of this church. Now, that's all pretty scary, isn't it? And if I've scared you, then just think of the last thing that comes out of this parable. Human potential. Do I believe in people? Yes, I do. Do I believe that the world can be changed, or dare I say it can be saved? Yes, I do. This parable, God's kingdom will be given over to the people who will live out the kingdom. You see, I do not accept the human and normal church tendency to label the whole of humanity as sinful. I believe just the opposite, that despite everything we muck up and get it wrong and behave so stupidly, on the whole, humanity, I believe, is intrinsically good. And I believe that time and time again, the impossible happens, and that on many, many occasions, the church has led the way. And when it has always been when it smashed down its walls and dared to venture into the so-called evil world. It has always been when the talking has stopped and the action begun. It has always been when a small group of people have realized that the church does not own God, that the kingdom of God is about people and issues outside its hallowed walls, that we step outside our vineyard and offer, as Jesus said, to others. And as the World Council of Churches once said, let the world, not the church, let the world write the agenda. It has always been when a small number of dedicated, committed, spirit-inspired people have broken out of the talking and the listening. Oh, we're a great listening church. We're told to listen all the time. Let's get out of that and get on with actually doing stuff. It has always been when the church has stood against the propriety and conformity of the traditional church structures, and like Martin Luther says, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Well, we're not Castle Church Wittenberg on that historic day 500 years ago, but we are St. Michael's with 150 years of history, emboldened with our independent spirit, situated in the best location in the city, and inspired by great people of the past. And within the uniting church, we can look back to people like John Wesley, who tells us today, do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. And here's another charge from that same man. He says, give me 100 preachers who fear nothing and desire nothing but God, and I care not whether they be clergy or lay people, it doesn't matter. And they will shake the gates of hell and set up the kingdom of heaven on earth. Well, today, he's only looking for 100. Today, we've got more than 100. What a start we've got. You say, I don't know whether I can do that. It's all too hard. Well, let me quote another great man, the halfback of Melbourne Storm, Cooper Cronk, who was one of the great players in the NRL final last week, who brought this wonderful trophy back to this foreign land as far as NRL is concerned. And when he was being interviewed at the end of the game, he said, "Melbourne Storm makes me bigger than I am." Now there's a message for us. St. Michael's, this church, makes us bigger than we are. This is our charge. This is our mission. This day will mark a new beginning for St. Michael's and for our world.